Hello and welcome back to Wyoming Watch from the Wyoming Tribune Eagle. I'm Noah Zahn, your state government reporter here. This week we're sharing a conversation that I had with our staff photographer, Mile Gladstein. He recently published an in-depth story and photo gallery that he's been working on for the past 8 months. And in this reporting, he's been interviewing and taking photos of how an organic farm in Laramie County is trying to do things a little bit differently and show that farming can be done on a large scale with little environmental impact. Here's that conversation now. So now I'm here with Mile Gladstein, our staff photographer, and we're going to talk about something you don't do too often. You wrote a story for us. You usually just write captions for the photos you take. But I guess, first of all, generally, can you tell me briefly what this story is and why you wanted to highlight it?
Yeah, so as you had said, I don't write a lot. Most of my time is just photos and obviously captions for the photos. But I'm a firm believer in the idea that a good photo story finds you. You don't find the photo story, as cliche and stupid as that sounds. And this was no exception to that. The Jessen Wheat Company was the subject of this story. They are a large-scale farming operation about 11 miles north of Pine Bluffs, so the southeast corner of the state. And Ashley, Clint's wife, it's Ashley and Clint Jessen, and they have a couple kids as well who help out and go to Pine Bluffs High School and whatnot. And Ashley is a photographer as well. And she shoots photos of a lot of the Pine Bluffs high school sports. And I actually met her on the sideline of one of the football games, and we got to talking, and then, just said hi, talked about photography, and that was kind of about it. And then a couple days later, she followed me on Instagram, and I saw in her bio, their Jessen Wheat Company website, and I was like, oh, what's this? And clicked on it, and agriculture and where our food comes from and environmental climate change stories are stories that I find to be some of the most interesting. And living here, we have the unique access to a lot of agriculture, farms, ranches, livestock, that kind of thing. And I noticed that they were unique. They're certified, USDA certified organic, and they are also farming regeneratively, which most farms in the country and especially in this area are not doing. As I had said in the story, according to the 2022 USDA farm census, only 6% of farms in Laramie County are certified organic, and only 7% farm with a reduced till manner. And so that's a super small percentage in Laramie County being an area with lots of farms and agricultural activity. It's pretty rare that people farm the way that the Jessens do. And so I wanted to highlight that and wanted to do a story both in photos and writing to highlight them and their operation, which led to an 8-month project that we recently published last weekend.
In 8 months, so you got to follow a decent amount of that cycle. Can you tell me where in that process you caught them and where they were whenever this came out?
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of highlight their whole project kind of from start to finish and what a typical growing season or year looks like for them. And I didn't know it was going to take 8 months when I started it. I just like to start a story like this and kind of let them take the reins and let the story kind of show itself to me. And it will unfold how it unfolds, and I'll work on it till it's done. And so we kind of did things out of order. So I started in the winter in January, and there's not, obviously it's winter in Wyoming. There's not a lot that grows at that time. So I had started highlighting their organic certified grain elevator, which is a huge part of their operation. It allows them to continue to work in the winter, which a lot of farms sometimes have trouble with. And they have the capacity not only to house their own grain in that elevator, but they also house other farmers' grain within that grain elevator. And when I was there, they received 9 rail cars. They're right on the railroad. And so being on the railroad allows them to ship their grain nationally at a moment's notice, which is huge for them and the other farmers who also store their grain in their grain elevator. And so that's kind of where we started. The other thing that they do is with some of the wheat that they grow, some of the hay bales get shipped down to Colorado to Horizon Dairy Farms, and the cows consume that hay, and then they get literally a truckload of manure back from those dairy farms that they use to spread on the fields to help the soil be healthier and be ready to plant in the spring. And so that's kind of where we started, was highlighting the grain elevator and this kind of give and take and reciprocal relationship with the Horizon Dairy Farm, and spreading manure on the fields is where we started.
And so they use no chemical fertilizer at all for their production? Is it all just from the manure and other practices, or do they have to supplement it with chemicals sometimes?
So being organic, you're not supplementing anything with chemicals. You can't use any chemicals in the land, and to be certified organic, you have to prove to the USDA that you haven't used any chemical additives or anything or pesticides for 36 months prior to any certification of any piece of land. And so that even extends beyond just what's done to the land. They have to talk about what they do every time they change the oil on the tractor and what happens to that and that kind of thing. So it extends even beyond just that physical piece of land as well.
Yeah, and this has proven to be sustainable for them. I think in your story you said they've been doing this since, doing organic practices for quite some time. Was that since 2002, or was it?
So Clint's family has always farmed in an organic manner and tried to do things the old school way, but they were never certified until 2001. In 2001, Clint officially took over the farm, and they received a premium from a buyer for them to become certified organic. So some farmers farm organically, they're just not certified organic because that takes a lot of extra time. It can be very expensive, and some people just don't want to go through the certification process. But for them, it was important because they received an extra premium from the buyer for this, which allowed them to bring in more money to the farm. So that was kind of the organic piece. The other piece to that is that Clint's wife, Ashley, is really passionate about the health benefits of being organic and wanted everybody to kind of have this idea that, what we put into our bodies matters. And they're trying to promote a healthy lifestyle from their farm. So the products that they give out to the rest of the world and that they feed themselves and their children are organic, and meaning they're better for us as people. And so there's kind of twofold benefit to that. There's the premium, and then there's also the health benefits to being organic. To contrast the organic side of the operation, the Jessen Wheat Company also farms in a regenerative manner. This is something that not a lot of farmers do, and Clint stated that this is something they do purely for the benefit of the soil, instead of for a benefit of the premium or healthier food for people. This is something that purely the environment benefits from and helps the farm in the long run, because you're farming in a way that you're giving back nutrients to the soil through the crops that you plant instead of chemical additives. So having a rotation of crops that fall into the legume family are known as nitrogen fixers, and those replenish those nutrients within the soil naturally and can even give them a crop that they can then sell and turn a profit for. So something like peas is a big one, and that's one that I was there photographing. Peas, beans, that kind of thing are all legumes. And so this allows them to fix the soil and have an additional revenue stream on the side. But really, it's just for the benefit of the soil, which is something that not a lot of farmers are doing and is really important to mention.
And so that's not something that they do, that's not involved in getting their organic certification. That's something they do to take care of their soil and maybe take care of their future yields.
Yeah, that's completely different than the organic certification. And regenerative is a kind of a newer idea that isn't as established as organic. And so there's no real official certification process for it yet. However, It is something that they have chosen to do, and other farmers who choose to do it of their own accord for no real benefit other than for the soil, which is huge because this is something that humans are doing directly to impact the earth and for the benefit of the earth alone.
Mm-hmm. In the health benefits, is that for her personally and for her family wanting to, be healthy for themselves and for their buyers, or are they trying to make an impact with other growers across the nation or the area that may not have as healthy practices, or is that not something they're really focused on right now? They're just kind of doing their own, focusing on their own lane.
I mean, I think for them, for Ashley especially, it's important to be healthy for them and their family. And I think that she also really enjoys that piece of education to talk to people about, hey, this is really important and the food that we put into our bodies matters. So she had talked about that as well.
Mm-hmm. And did you have any conversations with them? I'm curious about, maybe long-term solutions, because there's, a handful of studies out there that show that, our world population relies on a lot of agriculture that produces food from using chemical pesticides. Do they have any idea or a vision for the future of, kind of trying to change that path?
Yeah, so I think that their whole operation kind of combats that idea. Mm. They're a very large farming operation, and they are able to farm completely certified organic and in a regenerative manner that is good for the soil and good for the earth. And by doing that alone kind of proves that vision for the future of, well, we're doing it and it works. And the ending quote of the story was, Clint saying that, some of the neighbors think they might be a little crazy for what they're doing or stepping outside the norm. And he goes, yeah, look, it probably was a little crazy. And then it worked. And, they've traveled around to conferences all around the country and stuff talking about what they do. And they are becoming the model for growing in this manner on a very large scale that not a lot of people are doing.
Mm-hmm. And we've talked a lot about the story and the Jessen family themselves and what they do. I'm curious about your, professional expertise with this, the photographs themselves. As a photojournalist, what were you trying to highlight in this kind of story, and how does this kind of story lend itself to that kind of telling the story through photos?
Yeah, so I think that things that I'm looking for as a photographer are giving a visual element to their story, because you can read about it and that gives one aspect, but being able to physically see what they're doing and see the land and understand what that looks like, I think adds a whole other element to the story. So being in this rural corner of southeast Wyoming, there's a lot of vastness. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what I wanted to share with people of like, this is a huge operation and you can really see it is a harsh and unforgiving environment. There's snow on the ground in a handful of the photos, and you can tell that it's winter, it's blustery, but here we are doing this work that matters. And so a lot of it, doing these photo stories is long days with them out there and just kind of observing what they do, how they're doing things, what the land looks like, and that kind of thing. And so getting photos of them planting and, running tractors and combines and, filling the grain elevator and emptying it into rail cars, like trying to give people a visual of what that process looks like. And so there are photos of spreading manure on the fields. There are photos of the grain elevator. There's photos of themselves in the wheat field, right? There's photos of the land kind of dry and barren, and you can just see that there's nothing growing there. And then by the end of the story, there's huge fields of wheat being harvested by huge combines driving through these fields. And so trying to give the reader a visual to go along with the story of this is what the land looks like and this is what the product looks like at the end, I think is really important for people who might not have seen that before.
Mm-hmm. And, what is your kind of strategy for approaching these intimate kind of stories? I think we may have talked about this before whenever you did your Freedom Project. Is that what it was called?
Yeah.
Of, getting to that place where you can become a sort of a fly on the wall in the situation where these people are comfortable with you around and you're not being intrusive. Was that ever an issue with this case, or is it just a matter of building a relationship with these sources?
Yeah, a lot of it is relationship building. And it is very intimate, and it's something that is mundane maybe to them because it is their life, right? And that's something that they do every day, but it's not to the viewer. And it's not to me, who's ever seen something like that before. And these stories take time. They don't just happen overnight.
Yeah.
And so the very first time I went out there to talk to them, I didn't even bring a camera. It was just a conversation to talk to Clint and Ashley about the idea of doing a story. I didn't even know if we were going to do the story. And, I was there for probably 2 hours the first day. And we just had a conversation about, what it would look like, what the plan was, what it is they actually do, and how that would manifest itself into a larger story. And I had kind of posed it to them of, I'm curious about what you guys do. I think what the work you're doing is really important, and I'd like to share your story and give you a place to say what it is you want to say. Because that's, in the end, that's what it's all about, is this is a place for them to say what they want to say and show the community what it is that they do on a daily basis and why they're doing it. And, that's how I'd initially posed it to them, is this is a place for you to share your story.
Yeah.
And, they said, okay, we did an initial interview that day about just kind of the history of the farm and everything that they were doing. And from there, obviously plants don't grow overnight, crops don't grow overnight. And so that's part of the reason it took so long, was coming back at pivotal moments in their operation. So coming in the winter, the first shoot was probably in February or something like that, January or February. There was snow on the ground. We did the grain elevator, loading hay into the trucks as well. And then I spent the rest of the time, they were loading the spreader with manure to spread on the fields. And so I spent the rest of the time kind of capturing that process and what that looks like. And I think for a lot of this, you actually can't be a fly on the wall. I think that you have to talk to the people and you have to be involved in the operation, or else you're not going to get the photos that matter. And so I spent time within the combine with their farm foreman, Jeremiah, and was sitting, 2 inches from him inside the combine and having conversations. And, knowing when to take photos, when to not take photos is a skill that comes with time. And these photos, you're not taking thousands of photos, you're taking a few photos each time, but most of it is just observing and learning. And that's really where you understand what's important to them and what's important to the operation. And then as the photographer, then it's my job to go about capturing that. I will say that, I didn't grow up with a farming background. I grew up in a city, and they were pivotal in showing me what those important moments were, with the spreading and the planting and the harvesting. Like, they were like, okay, here's how we do this. And then they would go, okay, so what do you think you want to do? And I go, oh, let's go over around to this side and do this and that and the other, while they were kind of doing their work. And it's all about having people, be comfortable with you being there, because if they're not comfortable with you being there, you're never going to get the shot. And so a lot of it is just hanging out, building relationships, talking to them about what they do, and getting a really good sense of that. And then they kind of start to forget you're there, and you can take photos while you're having conversations out in the field and stuff. And sometimes those are the most impactful photos, where people don't even really realize that it's happening. And then you end up with those photos in the end that sometimes become the most impactful.
And have you photographed much of these, I guess, just these large-scale farms before? You've been in the area for a few years now, or is this kind of a new project for you?
This was a new realm for me. I did a somewhat similar-ish story about a woman in Fort Collins who received a grant from the USDA to get a mobile juicing trailer that she brought all over the state of Colorado to juice fruit known as seconds that would never make it to market due to quality-based contracts. And with the juice, she would then either distribute it to other alcohol or cider producers, or she'd bring it back to her own hard cider bar and facility, and she would brew her own hard cider from this fruit that would have never made it to market. And so that was a kind of agriculture story in and of itself. And I traveled all over Colorado with her to do that story. But this was the first time I had really spent time with one specific family of farmers on their land and just purely talked about farming and the soil and that kind of thing. So it's almost a science story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. What was the learning curve like that for you? How much, like you said, you hadn't been on these kind of large scale farms much before besides that other story where it was sort of agriculture and science related. Did you have to do a lot of research, or was it just talking with them and learning about that?
I didn't do a lot of research beforehand. A lot of it was just talking to them and just being really candid about like, hey, what are you guys doing?
Yeah.
Because that's a lot of what this job is like, hey, I'm curious about what you're doing and I don't know about it, but you do. And maybe somebody else is curious about it. And what better source than the horse's mouth in that scenario of like, hey, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And then they kind of explain what they're doing. And farming and where our food comes from and why that's all important to us and to the planet as a whole is something that I'm personally interested in and have read books about and stuff on my own time. But this was the first time that physically I'm standing in the field with them. I hadn't really done anything like that in the past, and so it was really cool to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best traits to have for this kind of job. You have to know what you don't know. You can't let yourself get in the way and act like you're an expert in everything and take everything from square one. Well, that's about all I've got for you. Is there anything else about this story that you want to add that you think is interesting to share or you want the listeners to know about?
I just think that the way that the Jessens are farming is really important, and the fact that they're doing it on such a large scale is very important, and I think that they're spot on with that. And I honestly, all I really have to say is thank you to them for allowing me to come in to Clinton Ashley. Thank you to them for allowing me to come in and document their life, document their farm, and everybody who works for them. Thank you for taking me around and answering all my questions that you probably have dealt with your entire life. Then should be common sense, but I didn't know the answer, so I really appreciate them for allowing me to come do the story and give them a platform to share their voice. I think it was really impactful for me to learn about everything they do and be able to capture that both in photos and in the story. And I hope that the community also gained something from that. And yeah.
Great. Thank you, Milo. I appreciate you coming in here and chatting about that. If you haven't checked out the story already, it's on our website, wyomingnews.com. It's called Against the Grain, Local Farm Goes Regenerative, Gives Back to the Land. The photos are really incredible. You did a good job with them. I know I couldn't do that, but be sure to check it out if you haven't already. And now here's our arts and entertainment reporter, Taylor Staples, to bring you a roundup of some events coming up in Cheyenne and Laramie County this week.
Today, August 22nd, the Soarin' Blue Pickleball and Cornhole Tournament takes place from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. at the Pickler. And there will be a new Frontier Western Collectibles and Firearms Show at 9 a.m. today and tomorrow at the Event Center at Archer. Then there's a quilt show from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. today and 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. tomorrow at First United Methodist Church. And finally, the Hell on Wheels Rodeo and Chuck Wagon Dinner Series takes place at 5 p.m. at the Event Center at Archer. On Saturday, August 23rd, an end-of-summer jamboree and fire truck pull will be at 9 a.m. at the Frontier Mall. Then there's a Cats on Mats event from 11 a.m. to noon at Cats and Coffee Connections, as well as a Paint and Sip Saturday there from 5 to 7 p.m. Also, there's an urban sketching pencil versus paint event from 2 to 4 p.m. at the Cheyenne Creativity Center. And Randy Travis will be performing at the Cheyenne Civic Center at 7:30 p.m. for the More Life Tour with James Dupree. And Cooper Allen will play at 8 p.m. at the Lincoln. On Monday, August 25th, the library will host a matinee movie for mindful aging with 2001: A Space Odyssey from 1:30 to 4:30 p.m. On Tuesday, August 26th, the library is hosting a Teen Art of Creativity Club from 4 to 5 p.m., as well as a Tuesday night book club with George Orwell's 1984 from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Then, the Cheyenne Creativity Center has a block ink press printmaking open studio session from 5:30 to 7 p.m. On Wednesday, August 27th, the Walking Fitness Series with Ralph Tamur goes from 9 to 10 a.m. at Performance Park, and the library also has a Stitch Fix drop-in knitting event from 5 to 7 p.m. Then, there's a Lunch and Learn event for Mastering Investment Strategies for Retirees at Laramie County Community College. Finally, on Thursday, August 28th, the library has a Teen Writing Club event from 4 to 5 p.m. and a True Crime Book Club from 6 to 7:30 p.m. And the week ends with Emo Night Karaoke at the Lincoln at 8 p.m. For a full list of events, go to wyomingnews.com/calendar.
And before we close out today, here's a recap of some of our top stories and headlines from the past week. Legislators voted to sponsor bills addressing the state's use of paper ballots and ballot drop boxes during Friday's Joint Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions Committee meeting. The two bills, which would require paper ballots to be the default voting method in each county and would prohibit the use of ballot drop boxes, are in alignment with the legislation that Secretary of State Chuck Gray backed earlier this year. A local fire chief and his wife accused of felony aggravated child abuse and conspiracy for their alleged treatment of their 13-year-old adopted son pleaded not guilty Thursday in Laramie County District Court. The charges were filed July 25th, and they alleged that Laramie County Fire District 1 Chief Derek Middlestat and his wife Angela Middlestat intentionally starved their older adopted son. Black Hills Energy and Northwestern Energy officials announced Tuesday that the two South Dakota-based companies plan to combine in an all-stock tax-free merger. According to a Black Hills Energy news release, each company's board of directors hopes the merger will create a premier regional regulated electric and natural gas utility company. And finally, a 20-year-old airman from F.E. Warren Air Force Base is being held without bond on a charge of involuntary manslaughter after police say he fired a gun through an apartment wall, resulting in the death of another airman on base. Airman First Class Jaden Orr was taken into custody following the fatal shooting around 3:21 a.m. Saturday in Sundance Apartments. That's all for this week's episode of Wyoming Watch. Thank you for tuning in, and be sure to check back next week for more.